Hi, I'm Dr. Donna Lane.
And I'm Dr. David Lane.
We thought we would spend a little bit of time today talking about our own experiences of Christmas and how we find joy during the holidays. We have different perspectives, so we thought we would share those perspectives with you.
My
David?
perspective is as a child, and I still, even at my somewhat advanced age, or some people would say quite advanced age, get a lot of childhood moments in Christmas. And let me tell you the origins of that. When I was a little kid, we were really poor. I grew up in East Central Alabama in a textile town. My dad worked in the cotton mills, and we lived in the cotton mill villages. The uh, job didn't pay much, but one of the things that the company did was they offset your salary by giving you really low or no cost housing. I think literally my parents paid like $5 a month for the house that we lived in, and it was in the cotton mill village. It was real small. There were we lived in a 3-room house for a while, and then my grandfather, who also worked in the mills, retired, and he and my grandmother moved in with us, and so we moved into a 4-room house so that they could have their own bedroom. And so, we were real poor. Now, like I said, I grew up in Alabama, and there were several classes of poor. We were just poor. There was another class called dirt poor. And there's another one that there were some colorful expressions about that I won't mention, but we were poor. We didn't have a lot. So Christmas was a really, really big deal. The only time that we got toys or games or a lot of candy, etc., was at Christmas. Our birthdays were a big deal too. We would get a nice present typically, and Mama would bake a really nice cake. But Christmas was just off the chain. I don't know how they did it on Daddy's salary. I think my mom probably set up a Christmas account at the bank, or she somehow squirreled away enough money, because we always just had what were, in my mind, spectacular Christmases. And in the cotton mill village, the mill had a big whistle that they blew at certain times of day. They blew it at the change of shifts. They would blow this big, it sounded like a steamboat whistle, at 6 in the morning for the morning shift folks. The overnight people would get off. The morning shift would report to work. They would blow it at noon for lunch break. They would blow it at 2 in the afternoon for change of shifts, and they would blow it at 10 o'clock at night. But on Christmas Eve, they would blow the big mill whistle when Santa Claus had been sighted in town. So a big deal on Christmas Eve was to listen for that mill whistle. Now, if you lived in the village, you were close to the mills already. And so it was very loud, and you didn't have to listen too hard, but every child that I knew would just squirm all over when the whistle would go, because that means Santa Claus is in town and you need to be in bed. But before that, Christmas Eve was an extraordinarily special day when I was a child. To this day, I'm now 67 years old, and to this day, I still get butterflies on the 23rd of December, because the 24th of December, we would get up in the morning and we would go to my dad's side of the family. He had an older sister who the family got together at her house, and everybody bought the kids a present. So we would go in, we would get there usually about between 9 and 10 probably. And she was the greatest. Well, I'll say she was the second greatest cook in the world. I have met every cook that's ever existed. So I got to leave room for, there might have been somebody better, but I've never met one who was a better cook than her. And she would bake all of these pies and cakes and cookies, and she especially liked to bake something that everybody liked. She knew what your favorite was, and she would always bake that. And there would be 25 people there, and she would bake 25 different things if necessary. It never amounted to that, because 5 of them wanted pumpkin pie, and another 8 wanted sweet potato pie. I wanted fruitcake cookies, so she always made me fruitcake cookies, and they were just extraordinary. Anyway, we would get there, and there would be fruitcake cookies, and we would open presents when everybody got there at 10 or 11 in the morning. We would exchange the presents, and everybody got the kids something. And so you have to think about a poor kid who doesn't get much. All of a sudden, he's got 4 or 5 families, all of whom are giving him a gift on Christmas Eve morning. Then we would sit down to a feast, like the Grinch's feast, and we would feast and feast and feast. And she was such a wonderful cook that we would have a wonderful, wonderful midday meal at her house. We would hang out for just an hour or two, and in the middle of the afternoon we would leave and go home and unload the car and change clothes and rest for just a little bit, because that evening we went to my grandmother, my maternal grandmother's house, where the scene repeated itself. A half a dozen families would come together, 12, 15, 20 people in their little house. But they made us wait, and we would eat supper first before we could open presents. So all of the kids, me and my cousins and my brother and my cousins, we would be dying. But they're all, why is supper taking so long? Why it just takes forever? And we would finally get in and open the presents after supper. And again, all of the families, and it was usually 4 families, or might have been 5, would get together, and all of them would buy the kids something. Everybody else would draw names. I don't know if that custom even exists anymore. But before we would leave that night, they would put everybody's name in a hat, and pull the name out of the hat, and that's who you got the present for next year. And so they would draw names, but everybody got the kids something. So that night we would get another 4 or 5 presents, and this is before we even went home for go to bed for Santa Claus. So on Christmas Eve, I would get 8 or 10 presents. Wonderful stuff, to games and toys, and it just it was incredible. It was like heaven for a child, particularly for a poor kid. And so we would leave there, we would go home, we would drive around, we would look at the Christmas lights on the way home. And one year we saw Santa Claus in somebody's living room putting presents under the Christmas tree, and me and my brother just had a fit, because we knew that we had just missed it, because he knows if you're sleeping, he knows if you're awake, he knows if you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake. So he was in this living room, and we started panicking. Oh, we've got to get home. We got to get home. We got home. And, of course he had not been to our house yet. And we quickly got into bed, and the next morning Santa had come. So to this day, I carry around a lot of the wonderful, wonderful things that, I experienced as a child on Christmas Day. It would always be just incredible. I have still to this day have no idea how they afforded such a lavish Christmas. And I know they depended a lot on Santa Claus for that, but that I don't know how they did it. And so it was just an incredible time. To this day, I carry a lot of it forward. Like I said, I still get butterflies on the 23rd, what we call the eve of Christmas Eve. So I still celebrate the eve of Christmas Eve with my butterflies. Then Christmas Eve, we still go and ride around and look at the Christmas lights in neighborhoods, decorated, etc. And it's just an extraordinary, completely magical time for me. And I carried that forward, and that's part of the joy for me is feeling that childhood spirit again. And on the inside, being 6 or 8 years old again for just a minute. Sometimes it's fleeting, but I do get little tastes of it every Christmas during the whole Christmas season. And I really look forward to that. And I find it a wonderful thing. But you got a different perspective. Talk about your
I
perspective.
have a very different point of view and a very different story. For me, Christmas in my childhood was not necessarily fun or magical. But once I became a Christian and my relationship with Christ deepened, I began to think of Christmas in light of the story, the birth story of Christ, and fell in love with Christmas, because if there was no Christmas, there would not be an Easter. And so realizing that Christmas is one of the most important events that has ever happened. The second, well, equal to maybe Easter being the other most important event that has ever happened in time. So I kind of think of it in terms of the different characters in the story, the different people that were involved in the story. I think what it would have been like to be Mary and have an angel appear in your home. And I'm thinking I would be saying something like, you got to be kidding me, or, something along those lines. I'm not sure I would have the same grace that Mary had. But how astounding that would be to feel chosen of God, to feel um, that special moment that you were going to be part of something that was going to change the world. I think about being a shepherd, kind of the great unwashed, so to speak, the ones that slept with the animals, the ones that stayed away from the towns, that nobody else cared about, the poor, um, the lowly, if you want to call it that, and what it would have been like for them to be chosen to be witnesses, to hear the song that the angels sang, to see the heavens break forth in joy. What kind of astounding experience that would have been for them. I think about Joseph and what it meant for him to think that he had been betrayed, to believe that um, the worst of Mary, maybe, thinking of it that way. And yet, God came to him in a dream and let him know that that wasn't true. And then, how would he have felt to know what everybody thought and know how everybody saw it? But he chose to do what God said, and he loved and cared for Mary and Jesus for the rest of his life. How that would have felt to him to be a part of that astounding experience. I think of Jesus and his choice to come, because it had to have been a choice. It had to have been something that he decided to do, not something that was forced upon him. If it wasn't a choice, it wasn't an act of love. And it was the greatest act of love that we have ever seen. I think about him making that choice, knowing what was ahead, knowing what it was going to ask of him, and still he made the choice. I think of him leaving behind the well, heaven first, but also the throne, so to speak. I mean, he was still Lord, but he left the heavenly throne and he became flesh. He joined with us to have the experience and for us to be able to connect with him, to truly connect with him in a way that we could understand. As C.S. Lewis describes it, the myth of the God who died, that's true. And how much love would it take to face that certain reality that he knew was coming and do it willingly, to put yourself as a helpless, weak infant in the arms of a teenage girl and a man who was not your father, and trust them with his care, to uh, go through life like we do, to experience the things we experience, to feel the sickness or to feel hunger, to feel tired when that's not heavenly experiences. So for me, when I think of those things, when I picture the story, when I see it as a reality, it always brings me tears and it brings me joy, to realize that he loves me that much. He did that for me. And so for me, that has made Christmas wonderful, meaningful, filled with joy, purposeful. The Christmas experience, the giving and receiving of gifts, my favorite part of that is picking out the most special present I can find for everybody that I love. I try to make the presents meaningful. I try to make a statement about, this is something that I wanted to say to you, or this is something I wanted to show you about how I feel about you. Just like Jesus, came and gave himself to make that statement. This is what I feel about you and how much I love you. So those are my thoughts on Christmas and my experience of it.
And whether you approach it from the childhood's magic through a child's eyes, or understanding the truth of the season and the birth and the grace that's extended. You know, I read something the other day. It was, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it said the only reason we need grace is because we can't do without sinning. And to think that he went through exactly what Donna's describing, knowing exactly where the path led, to give us grace, to bring grace for us so that we could be complete in him. So whether you view it through the magic of a child's eyes or whether you view it through the story, joy is available. Joy is there. Joy is for everyone. Peace and joy are made available to us for everyone.
So we hope that you all have a very blessed Christmas and that you experience love in relationship, no matter who the relationship is with, if it's family, if it's friends, or if it's Jesus. We pray that you feel joy in that relationship and love.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.